Okay, so this is an attempt for me to articulate my thoughts in a cohesive and systematic way to better understand what it is that I want to do. So, I'll explain the task that I've been thinking about for some time now. Get this thing to work. So, a little bit of background just to start. I am 31 years old, born and raised in the southwestern part of the United States, city Albuquerque, and the state of New Mexico. And part of what I've been trying to do since my 20s, I'd say, let's say about 23 years old, when I really started thinking, well, let's say deeply at that point, about culture, about just the people of New Mexico in general. I think when I really started to think, I remember very vividly I had this story, and it was something like this. I was working for the city, which I still do. I was driving buses at the time, something that I never thought I'd find myself doing, but that's sometimes the way life works. And I can remember I hated the job. It was something that was really, really hard for me to do, psychologically, I'd say, because I always thought I was so much better than the job. The job was beneath me, but I thought, but I think I thought that, but I think in reality it was never beneath me. I don't think jobs are beneath people anymore, even though I do think that it's complicated to really get to that point, especially for somebody like me who has a lot of pride and perhaps some superiority complexes. But at any rate, I was driving the bus, and I remember to pass the time I would write and I would read, and in this particular time I was writing. And you pick up people in Albuquerque. You pick up predominantly, now this isn't true all the way, that there are different types of people, demographics that ride the bus, but on average you pick up probably the people that, let's just say, the lower end of society, the lower class, are the people that ride the bus in our city. And so I can remember never identifying with them. In fact, even in that statement, I always refer to them as them. It was they. There is never, for me, a possessive way to talk about them. I didn't identify with them at all until one day, as I was thinking, that I think really the way I conceptualized it in that particular time was, I think I was reading Exodus and about Moses, and Moses called them my people. And I thought, what an interesting thing to say, to have a people, And I thought, well, what does that mean exactly? And, how do we identify? How do we, let's say, group ourselves to some degree? And so I realized that I never identified with the people of New Mexico, especially not that group of people. And in that moment I thought, well, why do I do that? Why do I talk that way? Why do I not identify and refer to them as they or as them? And so I realized that in that moment that I am them, that they are me. And it was really it was really eye-opening for me, I remember, at the time. And so it was in that moment that I thought, well, who are we? Like, how did we get here? And what is a New Mexican, if we can call ourselves that? Or what do we even call ourselves? And are we, it was in that moment that those are the sort of questions that I think were cycling through my mind. And then I think the internet culture really was taking off at this time, and you start reading about New Mexico. And whenever you read about New Mexico, now obviously after the Breaking Bad film, there is this idea of New Mexico, or particularly Albuquerque, as Breaking Bad like, and maybe to some degree it is. I don't know enough about Breaking Bad to know that, but the Albuquerque, in particular, New Mexico as a whole, is never looked at in a good light. It's always talked about in a bad light: poor, crime, drugs, low, low on education. I mean, there are some bright stars within that, but I'd say the predominant description of the state, and really, I guess you would say that's a qualifier of the people to some degree. I mean, I don't know where you would separate those two concepts, but at any rate, that's what you hear. You hear very poor, very uneducated, or does really poor in education, high in crime, drug use, high in drug use, high in teen pregnancy, high in single mothers. Obviously, we're a minority state because we're dominated by Hispanics and natives, or Spaniards, or Chicanos, whatever term is suitable, which I think you can have a conversation about what exactly those are. And perhaps at a time I will attempt to do that. But it was in these moments that I started thinking about New Mexico deeply. I mean, the people, the culture, the history. And I wanted, I guess, to be honest, there was a little bit I had a little bit of, I want to say disgust, and that's not the right word, but for the time being, let's just go with disgust towards the way in which we were caricatured as being this way. Because I don't see myself as necessarily poor, uneducated, a drug user, or anything of the likes. I don't see myself that way. And so it bothered me whenever I would see these gross caricatures of us that way. And I don't doubt that there is validity to that, because there is validity to that. So it bothered me. It bothered me to the point of where I wanted to figure out exactly why we struggle the way we do. And so I was taking a New Mexico history class, and it was very, very enlightening. I was learning things that I had never known about New Mexico culture, and I remember writing a paper about it. And one of the things that I found fascinating, there's a book by George Sanchez. He was a scholar. He's from northern New Mexico, Taos in particular. And he wrote the book called The Forgotten People. And in that book, he really, I think the book, let's say the early 19 to mid 1900s, something like that. Like, I want to say maybe 1920s he was writing this book, maybe even a little bit sooner. Definitely no later than the 30s. And he's describing New Mexico. And there was one thing in particular that I started reading this book. It was so eye-opening. And one of the things that I came across, and that really struck me as odd and super insightful, was this realization that the place that I come from has been, one, isolated. So we've lived in New Mexico, let's say, before the Industrial Revolution, and before, obviously, the Internet Revolution. But before the Industrial Revolution, New Mexico, at that point, let's say before the 1800s, New Spain it was called, and then before that, you had a bunch of different native groups, depending on where you were. But let's say when the Spaniards came and the Europeans start to settle the southwestern part of the United States, particularly where I'm at, there is a lot of isolation, meaning